The air was crisp that morning on the outskirts of Willowbend, a sun-washed western town nestled between golden hills and pine-covered ridges. Birds flitted between weathered fences, and horses flicked their tails in quiet rhythm. It was the kind of morning where nothing felt urgent, and everything seemed just as it should be. At the far edge of a sprawling estate, beyond the white pillars and polished stone fountains, sat a little girl on the front steps. Her name was Clara. 9 years old, with freckles scattered across her nose and auburn curls falling past her shoulders, Clara was unlike the other children in Willowbend, not because she couldn't smile, or dream, or imagine, but because she couldn't hear. She had been born with moderate to severe hearing loss in both ears, a condition diagnosed before she could speak. Thanks to her mother, she'd had early access to hearing aids and learned to read lips with astonishing clarity. But after her mother passed in a carriage accident 2 years ago, her world had grown quieter again, not because of her ears, but because of the silence inside her home. Clara lived with her father, Mr. Everett Grayson, a wealthy cattle baron with salt and pepper hair, hands that smelled of cigars and paper contracts, and a heart more acquainted with numbers than affection. He loved appearances. He loved order. He did not love inconvenience. And in his world, Clara's disability was just that. Still, she tried to reach him. Each morning, she'd wave to him in the mirror, signing good morning before she put her hearing aids in. And each evening, she'd sit on the wooden fence at sunset, waiting for his carriage to return from town. She never missed a night. Only one creature in the Grayson estate understood her without sound, her white horse, Silas. Silas was unlike any of the stallions in the Grayson stables. He had been Clara's since she was 5. She named him after a storybook knight, noble and kind. While the other horses responded to whistles and commands, Silas responded to Clara's hands, her presence, her quiet. If she was upset, Silas would nudge her softly. If she was lonely, he'd follow her like a shadow. They had an understanding deeper than words. That morning, Clara brought Silas a red apple and rested her forehead against his. His breath was warm on her cheek. She whispered, "You're my best friend," even though she wasn't sure how clear her own voice sounded anymore. But Silas blinked slowly, as if answering her. Back at the house, Mr. Grayson stood on the veranda with his leather gloves on, watching her through gold-rimmed spectacles. His expression was unreadable. When Clara looked up and smiled, waving, he offered a curt nod and turned away. Behind the closed doors of the Grayson home, love was a language rarely spoken. Later that afternoon, a seamstress arrived. She was preparing Clara's outfit for a charity event the following week. It was Grayson's first public appearance with his daughter since his wife's passing. He wanted perfection. Clara was instructed to stand still. The woman measured, pinned, adjusted. But halfway through, Clara misunderstood a direction and turned too quickly, making the fabric tear slightly under pressure. The seamstress gasped. Grayson, watching from a distance, walked forward. His tone was calm, but cold. "She's wearing those things again, isn't she?" The seamstress didn't respond. Grayson bent down beside Clara, speaking firmly, lips moving deliberately, "Take them out." Clara hesitated. She looked to the woman for reassurance. None came. "Now." Reluctantly, Clara removed her hearing aids and held them out. He took them from her palm and examined them, delicate, fragile, lifelines of sound. With a motion as sudden as a snake strike, Grayson snapped them in half. Clara's world fell silent. The seamstress flinched. "Sir?" "She needs to learn to listen with her eyes," he muttered, tossing the broken pieces into a brass tray on the table. "She won't embarrass me again." Clara stood frozen. Her lip trembled, but she didn't cry. She just turned and ran. Through the garden, past the fountain, through the orchard, and into the stables, straight to Silas. She threw her arms around his neck and wept silently into his mane. And Silas stood still, breathing deep, wrapping his head gently around her shoulder. That night, the Grayson estate was quiet. The moonlight spilled over Clara's windowsill as she lay curled up in bed without her hearing aids, her eyes wide open in the dark. In the corner of the field, beneath a row of silver-barked aspens, Silas stood alert, ears twitching, eyes glinting. He had seen what happened. He had felt her pain. And deep in his steady heart, something stirred. The next morning dawned heavy and gray. A chill lingered in the air, and the clouds rolled over the hills like slow-moving herds of smoke. It was the kind of day that warned of storms, not just in the skies. Clara hadn't spoken a word since the incident. She hadn't signed, hadn't smiled, hadn't even looked toward the house. She spent the night in silence, not just from her broken hearing aids, but from something deeper, something fractured. She didn't come down for breakfast, and no one came to check on her. Her meals were left outside the door like offerings to a ghost. In the stables, Silas grew restless. He pawed the ground, refusing feed. He kept pacing near the gate, looking toward the house. The stable boy, Jesse, a kind teenager from town who had grown fond of Clara and Silas both, noticed the horse's agitation. "She ain't come down yet?" Jesse asked softly, brushing Silas's side. The horse jerked slightly at his touch and turned toward the hill. Jesse narrowed his eyes. "You know something, don't ya?" Later that afternoon, Mr. Grayson called for Clara. The carriage was waiting. They were to attend a private luncheon at the mayor's home. The event was supposed to reintroduce Clara into society, as the poised, perfect daughter of Willow Bend's most powerful man. No mistakes. No flaws. No hearing aids. Clara walked out in a muted blue dress, her curls pinned tightly, her lips pressed into a pale line. Her hands were clenched around a small velvet pouch, inside it, the shattered pieces of her hearing aids, still warm from under her pillow. Mr. Grayson didn't speak. He simply offered his hand and helped her into the carriage. The ride was quiet. Clara stared out the window, her breath fogging the glass. She could see the hills stretching beyond the ranch, and just at the edge of the forest, a flicker of light, a flash of mane in the distance. Silas. Watching. They arrived at the mayor's estate, a grand Victorian house trimmed in gold, with townsfolk mingling in top hats and feathered gowns. Inside, Clara was introduced to strangers with fake smiles and louder voices than she could decipher. Her father placed a firm hand on her shoulder whenever she looked uncertain, as if to remind her, "Don't ruin this." But everything changed when one of the guests, an older woman with soft eyes, knelt down beside Clara and tried to speak to her. She smiled gently, then signed with slow, practiced hands, "Are you okay?" Clara's eyes widened. She hadn't seen another adult use sign language since her mother died. Her lips quivered. She nodded slowly. The woman continued, "You don't have your aids today?" Clara reached into her dress pocket and pulled out the pouch. She unwrapped the broken pieces in her palm and looked down. Before the woman could respond, Mr. Grayson's shadow loomed over them. "We don't use those anymore," he said sharply. "She's learning to adapt." The woman rose, confused. "But she..." "I said she's fine." He took Clara by the arm, not roughly, but firm enough that she understood. The woman's brows furrowed, and she stepped back. The rest of the luncheon blurred for Clara. The food was tasteless. The music meant nothing. The voices were a sea of mouths moving and eyes glancing away. By the time they returned home, Clara's head ached. She descended from the carriage and walked away without a word. She didn't notice Jesse standing near the barn with a troubled look on his face. And she didn't see Silas watching her from the ridge, his tail flicking against the wind. That night, the storm came. Rain lashed against the windows. Thunder rumbled over the hills. Lightning lit up the orchard in flashes of pale blue. Clara sat by her window, holding the broken hearing aids in her hands. Her lips moved silently as she tried to remember the sound of her mother's voice. Across the pasture, Silas stood near the fence, his mane wet, his muscles tense. And then, it happened. Mr. Grayson burst into her room without knocking. His coat was soaked from the storm. "We leave for Denver tomorrow. I've arranged for new tutors," he said. "You'll be staying with the Wilkes family for a few months. They've agreed to supervise you until the school is ready." Clara's hands flew into motion. Why? Why can't I stay here? He didn't respond. Why did you break them? Why won't you let me be who I am? I won't have a daughter paraded around like a defect, he snapped. The words hit harder than the storm outside. Clara stood, trembling. She walked past him, down the stairs, out the front door, into the pouring rain, barefoot, dress soaked, eyes filled with tears. And behind her, Silas broke into a gallop. He charged from the ridge down to the barn, crashing through the gate, ignoring Jesse's shouts. Mud splashed under his hooves as he ran full speed toward the house. Mr. Grayson stepped outside, shouting angrily, but Silas didn't stop. He galloped past the porch, past Clara, then stopped suddenly at the edge of the orchard. He turned his head sharply, snorted, and stomped the ground twice. Then he looked back at Clara. And waited. It was an invitation. Clara blinked through the rain. And slowly, she followed him. They disappeared into the storm together. The rain had slowed to a whisper by dawn. The hills around Willowbend were drenched, the earth slick with mud and the sky still heavy with clouds. But in the clearing near the northern ridge, far from the mansion, far from Grayson's reach, a small figure sat against a tree, wrapped in a wet woolen shawl. Clara. And beside her, his body half guarding hers from the elements, stood Silas, breathing slow, steady, like he'd been keeping watch all night. The white of his coat was streaked with brown and gray from the storm, but his eyes remained clear, focused on the trail ahead. Clara stirred and sat up. Her dress clung to her skin, and her hands were stiff from the cold, but she felt something she hadn't in days, freedom. She looked at Silas and signed, "Where are you taking me?" The horse blinked. And then he turned, nudging her softly toward his saddle blanket. Jesse must have draped it over him the day before, now soaked, but still offering a sliver of warmth. Clara hesitated, then slowly climbed onto his back, gripping his mane tightly. Silas began to walk, slowly at first, then picking up into a steady trot. They passed through narrow valleys, past forgotten barns and moss-covered fences. Clara didn't know where they were going, but she trusted Silas more than she had ever trusted her father. The broken pieces of her hearing aids still rested in her pouch, tied to her waist. By mid-morning, they reached a dirt path leading toward a town she hadn't seen before, Briar Glen, a smaller, quieter settlement nestled at the foot of the Blue Pines. And there, at the edge of town, stood a white-painted building with a green sign. Dr. Abigail Moore, Audiology and Speech Services. Clara gasped. Her fingers tightened around Silas's mane. "This is where you're taking me?" She signed, eyes wide. Silas stopped at the front gate. Inside, an older woman in a long gray coat stood watering her porch plants. Her hair was tucked under a bonnet, and she wore thick spectacles perched on a sharp but kind nose. She noticed the girl on the white horse and froze. Clara slid down slowly, her legs trembling as she approached the porch. The woman opened her door and stepped outside cautiously. "You all right, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. Clara hesitated, then pulled the pouch from her waist and held it up. Dr. Moore took it carefully and opened it. Her eyes widened as she saw the broken devices. "You wear these?" she asked. Clara nodded. "Where's your family?" Clara looked down, then toward Silas. The woman looked between them for a long moment, and understood more than words could explain. "Come inside, child." Inside, the clinic was warm and clean. Books lined the shelves. Old hearing molds rested in glass cases. There were charts with diagrams of ears, sound waves, and hands forming letters of the alphabet. Dr. Moore led Clara to a soft armchair near the fireplace and returned moments later with a blanket and tea. "You're not the first girl to come here needing help," she said quietly, kneeling beside her. "And you won't be the last. But you may be the bravest." She examined the hearing aids carefully. "The circuitry's cracked. The shell is crushed. But I may have parts." She paused. "I'll need time." Clara signed. "Can I stay?" "Just a little." "I won't let anyone take you away," not until we figure this out." Outside, Silas remained near the porch, stomping once, then twice, as if to say, "You're safe now." Back at the Grayson estate, Jesse was soaked, muddy, and exhausted. He had searched the hills since dawn, calling for Clara, hoping for a glimpse of Silas's white coat. When he returned, Mr. Grayson was pacing in the foyer. "Did you find them?" he barked. Jesse hesitated. "No, sir." Grayson's jaw clenched. "Send for the sheriff." Jesse shifted uneasily. "You sure that's what you want?" Grayson glared. "She's my daughter." "She ran, sir. That horse took her." "No, sir," Jesse said slowly. "That horse saved her." The silence between them stretched like a rope about to snap. Grayson turned away. But later that evening, Jesse quietly saddled his own horse and rode out, toward Briar Glen. Back in Dr. Moore's clinic, Clara sat beside the fireplace, watching as the doctor slowly assembled replacement parts, carefully piecing together new molds and circuit boards from salvaged supplies. "You know," Dr. Moore said as she soldered a connection, "I met your mother once. Years ago. She brought you here when you were just a toddler. You had the whitest eyes I'd ever seen." Clara looked up in surprise. "She said you were a fighter." Clara smiled faintly. "She would have been proud of you." They worked late into the night. And by morning, the devices were ready. Clara sat upright in the chair. Dr. Moore leaned down, carefully placing the new aids behind Clara's ears. She flipped a switch. Clara blinked. The world returned. Not perfectly. Not loudly. But enough. She heard the crackle of the fire. The soft whinny of Silas outside. The steady hum of life returning. Tears filled her eyes. "I can hear again," she whispered. Dr. Moore smiled. "Welcome back." But outside, something was happening. Silas lifted his head. Down the road, a black carriage was rolling into town, trimmed in silver, drawn by dark stallions. And seated inside, pale and unreadable, was Mr. Everett Grayson. The carriage wheels screeched slightly as they came to a halt outside Dr. Moore's clinic. Dust and water pooled under the iron rims, and the scent of rain still hung in the air. Inside the carriage sat Everett Grayson, hat in hand, eyes cold. He hadn't slept. No one had told him where his daughter was. Not the sheriff. Not Jesse. Not even the stable hands. But the white horse, that infernal beast, had been seen heading toward Briar Glen. And Grayson, though prideful, was not stupid. He stepped out slowly, boots crunching the gravel, coat damp from the storm. The townsfolk of Briar Glen noticed him instantly. Wealth traveled loud, even when silent. Mothers pulled their children closer. An old man tipped his hat, but not in greeting. In warning. Grayson ignored them. He approached the front door of the clinic and raised a hand to knock. But before his knuckles touched the wood, Silas was there, hooves stomping between Grayson and the door. The white horse stood firm, unmoving. His coat still soaked, but his stance was iron. His chest heaved, his nostrils flared. Grayson took a step back. "Move," he said plainly. Silas didn't. "I said move." The horse pawed the ground once. Then again. His eyes locked with Grayson's, unblinking. From the window, Clara peered out. She had heard the voice, faint, distant, but unmistakable. Her father. Her heart raced. Dr. Moore stepped beside her. "He has no legal claim to remove you from here without your consent, not anymore." Clara turned to her. "But he'll try. He'll never stop." Moore gave a small smile. "Then maybe he needs to be shown what strength really looks like." Outside, Jesse rode up, dismounting quickly. His hat nearly flew off from the sudden stop. "Mr. Grayson," he called out. Grayson turned, agitated. "Not now. Please, sir, hear me out. I don't need another boy's opinion." "But you need the truth," Jesse said. Grayson glared. Speak, then. Jessie stepped closer, voice steady. That horse, he's not wild. He's not dangerous. He's loyal. Clara didn't run from you because of her hearing. She ran because you refused to listen. That horse saw it. Felt it. Protected her when no one else did. Including you. Grayson's eyes narrowed. Enough. Is it? Jessie challenged. You snapped her only link to the world and expected her to smile. You treated her like a flaw instead of a gift. And now you think you can drag her back like luggage? For a long moment, silence. Then, the door creaked open. Clara stepped out, her coat wrapped tight, hair still damp, her new hearing aids barely visible beneath her curls. Her voice trembled, but it came, please go home. Grayson turned, stunned. It was the first time he'd heard her speak since the funeral. You don't know what you're saying, he murmured. I do. You're my daughter. Then act like it. The words struck like lightning. Grayson faltered. Clara took a deep breath, stepped forward, and handed him something, the velvet pouch. He opened it. Inside, the broken hearing aids he had destroyed. She met his eyes. You can't fix everything with money. But maybe you could have started by not breaking me. And then, she turned and walked back toward Silas. The white horse bowed his head slightly as she neared, as if knowing she had won something more valuable than any inheritance. Grayson stood frozen, unsure what to do. Then, click, a voice spoke from behind him. The mayor of Briar Glen, flanked by 2 town deputies, had arrived quietly. Mr. Grayson, the mayor said, we received a call from Dr. Moore. Allegations of neglect, endangerment. They're being reviewed at the state level. Until then, Clara remains here under protected care. Grayson's mouth opened slightly, but no words came. The mayor added, and the horse? He stays with her. Grayson looked again at Silas, no longer just a horse in his stable, but something far greater. A guardian. A witness. A soul with no voice, yet more eloquent than any man. The millionaire lowered his head, more out of defeat than shame, and turned back toward his carriage. But before stepping in, he looked over his shoulder one last time. Clara stood beside Silas, hand resting on his mane, her new hearing aids humming quietly in the morning breeze. Grayson watched her for a long moment. Then he said, just loud enough for her to hear. I'm sorry. Clara didn't respond. But Silas let out a soft snort, almost like a breath of approval. And for once, that was enough. 3 weeks passed. The rain gave way to blooming meadows and soft sunlight over Briar Glen. The mountains that once loomed dark and distant now looked warm and open. And within that healing stillness, Clara found something she never expected, a home. She stayed at Dr. Moore's clinic, sleeping in the little room behind the library, helping tend to patients, organizing hearing molds and alphabet cards, learning to solder basic wiring. For the first time in years, her world wasn't just audible, it was understood. Jessie visited every other day. Sometimes with new blankets, sometimes with apples for Silas, but mostly just to talk. Clara began speaking more often, softly, slowly, but clearly. She's got her mother's cadence, Dr. Moore said one afternoon, watching her from the porch. Gentle, but certain. As for Silas, he had become something of a local legend. Children left carrots at the gate. Farmers waved when he passed. The sheriff even joked about getting him a deputy's badge after hearing the full story. But Silas didn't care for fame. He only cared for Clara, following her through town like a quiet shadow, ears tuned to her every breath. One morning, a letter arrived at the clinic, wax-sealed, bearing the Grayson family crest. Dr. Moore opened it cautiously, her eyes scanning quickly. Clara stood nearby. What is it? Moore looked up, stunned. It's from your father. Clara's breath caught. Moore read aloud. Asterisk to Dr. Abigail Moore. Thank you for caring for Clara when I failed. I've stepped down from my position at the livestock board and turned over the estate to a trust. Enclosed is a deed to the pastureland surrounding your clinic. I hope it becomes something better under your care than it ever was under mine. I've enrolled myself in counseling. Not because the courts demanded it, but because my daughter deserved it long ago. Please give her this, if she'll take it. Asterisk. Inside the envelope was a velvet box. Moore opened it slowly. Inside was a brand new pair of top-tier hearing aids. Custom-made. Engraved with Clara's initials. Clara didn't say anything at first. She just sat down quietly beside Silas and rested her head against his neck. "He's trying," she whispered. Silas blinked, then gently lowered his head to her lap. 2 months later. A new sign stood outside the clinic. The Clara Grayson Center. For children with hearing loss. In honor of a girl who heard with her heart first. It was Clara's idea, and it was funded partly by the land her father donated, and partly by a silent auction where Silas, somehow, was the guest of honor. People came from neighboring towns to see the white horse who stood guard outside the porch. He'd greet them with a slow nod and a flick of his tail, but his eyes always drifted back toward the clinic's front door. Waiting. For her. One crisp autumn afternoon, Clara stood in front of a class of children, all wearing various types of hearing devices. She raised her hand, and the children watched carefully. "My name is Clara," she signed and spoke. "And I'm not broken. I'm just different." Smiles spread across the room. Outside the window, Silas stood by the orchard, watching quietly. Dr. Moore joined him, resting a hand on his mane. "You changed everything, didn't you?" she said softly. Silas didn't move. Just breathed, deep, steady, eternal. That evening. Under a sky bursting with orange and violet, Clara led Silas up the ridge trail behind the clinic. They stood at the top, looking over Briar Glen. She turned to him, brushing his muzzle gently. "You knew where I needed to go, before I did." Silas lowered his head. Clara smiled. "You heard the part of me no one else did." She reached into her pocket and took out the old velvet pouch, worn and faded. Inside it now were flowers, not hearing aids. Wild ones. Bluebells, sunflowers, white clover. She scattered them across the hill. "For my mom," she whispered. "And for the girl I used to be." Silas stood beside her, tail flicking slowly in the breeze. Together, they watched the sun dip below the horizon. Not as a girl and her horse. But as survivors. As a team. As the beating heart of a story that no one, not even a millionaire, could silence. Final reflection, life lesson. Sometimes, the loudest cruelty isn't shouted, it's quiet neglect. But sometimes, love doesn't need a voice. Sometimes, it arrives on hooves, with eyes that never judge and loyalty that never wavers. We don't choose how we're born. But we can choose who we become. And if we're lucky, we'll find a Silas along the way. Someone who hears us, even when the world doesn't. Book recommendations. Out of My Mind by Sharon M. Draper, a powerful story about a girl with cerebral palsy who cannot speak, yet has a brilliant mind and a spirit no one can cage. Wonder by R.J. Palacio, a heartwarming reminder that kindness is a language even silence can speak.